All right, let's get into it. So, yeah, today we're talking about how to build animated mobile nav bars using framer-motion and Tailwind CSS. So, before we get into that, let's talk about just who I am. So, my name is Shaun Chander. I am now an ex-engineer over at the Milk Road. The Milk Road is a cryptocurrency newsletter and media website. And yeah, so I'm now an ex-engineer there. This is also my first conference talk too, so just pardon me if I get a little bit nervous or a little bit jumpy when I'm talking. And another thing that I do is I like to blog a lot on my personal website, shaunchander.me. So if you want to see any tutorials or any content from me, just feel free to go there. And I kind of have a random schedule of posting right now, so I'll try to get more consistent with that. Cool. All right, so just a breakdown for how this is going to go today. We're going to first talk about like why we even care about this topic and a little bit more about what framer motion is. I'll then give you a very quick and dirty introduction to framer motion. I call it move a box. And then at the very end, we will build an animated mobile nav bar from scratch, and I'll show you that in real time how to do that with framer motion and Tailwind CSS. Okay, animations. Why exactly do we care about them in the first place? I think one of the biggest things about animations is that they really grab the user's attention. Now, before I even said anything, you guys were probably already paying attention to the moving circle and square to the right-hand side. And again, that's an example of grabbing the user's attention. The second point is a little bit abstract, and it's a little bit more prevalent to what I'm talking about today. Animations prevent something that I like to call a content flashbang, and I will explain what this means more in a little bit. But for now, essentially, what a content flashbang is when you click on a button or some sort of interactable element, and boom, some new content pops up on the page, like a modal or a nav bar, and it's just a shift in content that happens instantaneously, and the user is kind of disoriented for a little bit just because new content showed up instantaneously. And then the last part about animations is that it's just an easy way to brighten up and sort of add extra flair to your design. So if you're looking to improve your design or you want to improve the user experience, a nice subtle animation is just a really quick and pretty cheap way to add that to your design. Cool. Let's talk about what framer motion actually is, though. So framer motion is a native, or not React native, but it is a framework built for React, and it's an animation library that's unlike the traditional libraries that we have, GSAP and Anim.js being the traditional ones. It started off as a small, sort of like rugged and very basic framework, but now today it is super robust. There's a lot of features to it, and it's got a lot of utilities and things that you can do to build animations in React. If you're familiar with the Motion One project, Framer Motion, the creator of Framer Motion is also building another framework called Framer or Motion One, sorry, and they both share a similar philosophy of being very simple to use animation frameworks. The last thing I do want to point out is that if you do Google Framer Motion, you may run into a product called Framer. And I want to just make the quick distinction right now that Framer Motion is not Framer. They're both built by the same company. Framer is a SaaS to build websites, and Framer Motion is a library to implement animations in React. Cool. Let's visit that previous point I made about the content flashbang. So over here, I have two websites. Site A is using your basic navbar that was built with UState, and Site B is a website using a framer motion navbar. Now, if I open the navbar on Site A, you can see instantaneously a navbar pops into place. New content has been added to the page, and it happens so quickly, the user would click on that and then just boom. There's no indication that that content would pop up like that. And in this case, we have a simple nav bar, but you could imagine a more complex nav bar with a lot of different content would just be instantaneously shown to the user. That might throw them off a little bit. Site B, on the other hand, is using a framer motion nav bar. And so when I open this, you can see that we have a subtle animation, things are moving. It's very clear to the user visually that things are changing and the content is getting updated in that way. And this is essentially the problem that I want to solve and kind of show you guys how to build. It's how to do this subtle sort of mobile navbar animation. Cool. Let's talk about let's get into framer motion and how it works. So we're gonna go through the move a box exercise. So to get started with framer motion, we first need to import motion from framer motion as a named import. This motion component is actually a JSX component, and it's a little bit unique. So let's say we want to define a div, right, with this motion component. The way that that works is I think I lost my slide. There we go. So the way that that works is you just append the actual tag that you want as a, you use a dot notation to append the tag that you want to this motion component. So rather than using the regular JSX elements that you have, you now use the motion component to create those JSX elements. And you can do it in this sort of dot syntax way. Now, all of the props that are available on any other JSX component are also available on the motion component. So we can slap a class name on this and use some Tailwind to create our box over here. So now let's actually move the box. To move a box in framer motion, all we need to do is add the animate prop. And inside of this animate prop, we just pass it some styles that we want to animate to. And so you'll notice that I put X 450 pixels here. There are some shorthands for framer motion. In this case, we're using X to represent translate X. So in this case, X 450 pixels means move to the left by, or sorry, move to the right by 450 pixels. And so that's how we can move a box in a very, very simple way. But you'll notice that when we actually added that animation, the box moved immediately. So whatever thing we put into the animate prop, that's what the component is going to animate to once it mounts onto the page. And we don't necessarily want that. So in this slide, what I have added here is a transition prop, and I put a delay on the box. The box already moved because the transition was only 1 second long, or sorry, the delay was 1 second long. But you can see that we can add a delay using the transition prop here. Now let's talk about a variant in framer motion. So previously we defined the animate using sort of this like inline CSS like styling with X 450 pixels. And while you can do that in framer motion, the actual recommended way of composing and creating animations is to use something called a variant. And on a very high level, a variant is just a namespace for your animation. So in this case, we've defined a variant prop, we've passed it an object, and all I've done here is move our animate of X 450 pixels into this object, and I gave it the name right, as in, move to the right. And so now, if we want to refer to this variant within our animate prop, we can do that using a string. And what we've done essentially here is just give our animation a name, right? It has a name. It's called a variant. It's the actual name is right. And so this is how we should be doing animations in framer motion. You always want to define them in variants and then refer to them in your animate prop as a string. And you'll see why you want to do that. I'll show you explicitly why you want to do that as we're building the navbar, but just know that this is the correct approach to defining an animation. Cool. So variants you can define as many variants as you want. So in here, what I've done is I've defined another variant called left, and I give it an X of 0 pixels. Now, we don't actually refer to left anywhere, so it never got applied. But let's go ahead and actually fix a problem that we have right now. So you'll notice that every time I switch a slide and the box mounts, right, it'll move immediately to the right because in the animate prop, we've told it to move to the right. We don't want that to happen though. We actually want it to just stay to the left, and then we want it to move to the right after let's say we want to have a user event happen, right? Like someone clicks on a button, then the box moves to the right. So how can we, build a feature like that? So we're going to make use of variants to do this. Now, sorry, to keep the box to the left, we're going to make use of another prop in framer motion called initial. So if animate is a prop that animates the box to a certain state, initial is sort of like the opposite of the animate prop. Initial essentially just says start the box at this variant state. And so what I've done here is I've set the initial to left. So what that means is move exactly 0 pixels. And I'm also animating it to the left as well, which also means move it 0 pixels. And because the initial and the animate states are equal in this example, the box just doesn't move. Hopefully, I believe that makes sense because, again, the initial and animate states, they're both the exact same variant state. Nothing has changed. So as a result, don't play an animation essentially. So let's actually go back and add a button now that lets us toggle between the two states. So in this example now, we have added a state. So we set it to dir and set dir. This is going to set the direction of the box. And by default, we set it to left. Now, we have two buttons down here, move left and move right. If I click on one of these buttons, it's going to set the state either to left or to right. And you'll notice that we set initial to left. And in the animate prop, we now have dir, which is a reference to the state, which itself is just a string left or right. And now when we click on this button, you can see that once we set the state to right, the component will remount. Animate is now equal to right, and the box moved to the right. We can do the same by moving it back to the left, back to the right, and we can do this perpetually. We've essentially created a state-based animation to move the box left or right. And that's essentially it. That's honestly all you need to know to build a navbar in framer-motion. Obviously, there's a little bit more complexities to this, so I'll explain that as I build the navbar itself. But let that be your basic and quick introduction to framer-motion. All right, I'm going to switch over here to a new page, and let me go ahead and open up VS Code real quick. Just bear with me for a bit. Okay, so we have a basic landing page here. I'm currently on the iPhone 5 SE view, so we're at a pretty much a mobile viewport here. And so far, we just have a basic hero section, some content, a button, and then we have our navbar up here. Let me go ahead and open up the code for that navbar. So this is what we're looking at right now for the basic JSX of this navbar. We have a header, which is set to sticky, top 0, inset x0, so it's just staying at the top of the page. We gave it a background color, and then we also have a nav defined inside of here. And then we have a button that defines 3 different spans. Each of these 3 spans is essentially a component of this little hamburger button that we have here. And so this is where we're going to start to build our actual mobile navbar. So let's get started. At the very top of the file, I'm going to import motion from framer-motion. And we're also going to import state from React. So let me go ahead and do that real quick as well. Import use state from React. Let's actually create a state variable that will keep track of the mobile navbar just to see if it's open or not. So set mobile nav, we'll set that to use state, and we'll keep it false at first. I'm going to create another function called toggle mobile nav. This is going to act as a wrapper around our state just to toggle the navbar on or off. So we'll set mobile nav to not mobile nav. I should probably mention I'm using GitHub Copilot to help out with writing the code here just to make it go a little bit faster. Just to answer your question, Darks, I am using a software or a framework called Spectacle. It's by Formidable Labs. It's a React-based framework for building slides in React. And yeah, it's really cool. It lets you do code samples and stuff with your slides. So we've defined a toggle mobile nav button here to toggle our mobile nav. Let's go ahead and add that to our button. So on click equals, misspelled that, on click equals toggle mobile nav. And then we'll save that. Now, the first thing we're going to do here is let's actually animate this button and make it so that when you click it, it goes from a hamburger icon and it turns into an X button. So to do that, we're going to convert our button into a motion button. So to do that, let's select our tag and make it a motion button like this. Save that. We're then going to define a few variants for the button. And to do this, we're going to do a variance prop. And then I'm going to give it 2 variants, one called hide and another called show. So the hide variant is going to be active when the mobile navbar is closed, and the show variant is going to be active when the mobile navbar is opened. So oh, sorry, I messed up here. My bad. These variants. So let me go back a little bit. My bad. When we're dealing with a button like so, when we're doing this, what we actually want to do is an initial, set that to hide, and an animate, And we'll set this to if mobile nav is true, as in if the mobile nav is open, then we want it to play the show variant. Otherwise, if it's false, then we want it to play the hide variant. Okay, back to what I was saying originally. So in these spans, we want these to move depending on if the mobile nav bar is open or not. We want it to go from the hamburger view to the X view. To do that, we need to convert these spans to a motion component. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Motion.span. And here is where we can define our variance. So variance equals, and like I said, we have two variants. We have hide and we have show. Now, just to step out real quick, what I wanted to, I forgot to mention this, but we can compose variants to create very basic timelines. So you'll see that this motion button is a parent to these motion span components. And as a result, any child of a motion component can inherit that parent's variance. Let me just say that again. So if you have if you are a child element within a motion component, as a child element, you can inherit your parent's variance. So as a result, we have access to this hide and show variant by virtue of being a child of this motion button component. So when the motion button is playing a show variant, the child can also play a show variant as well. And this is how we can build a very basic timeline using framer motion variants. So just to demo how that would work, in our hide variant, let's go ahead and give this a rotate of 0. And in our show variant, we're going to give this a rotate of 45 degrees. And we're going to go ahead and copy this guy. And then on the third span, we're going to give that a rotate of minus 45 degrees. So what's essentially happening is if these are the two hamburger buttons or the two hamburger lines, it's going to go kind of like this in a way. And we'll see that happen. In the for the middle span, what we want to have happen here is just change to an opacity of 0. So when it's hidden, sorry, we want it to be an opacity of 0. When it's open, we want it to have an opacity of, or sorry, this one is 0. When it's hidden, we want it to have an opacity of 1. Okay, go ahead and refresh the page here, and then we will run our animation. And so we see that the X button is almost there. We're just missing a small piece of it. So this is where creative web design gets a little bit hacky and a little bit fun. So to fix this problem, all we're going to do is just move the two spans up and down. So to do this, for the top button, we're going to move it down by 5 pixels. And then for the bottom bar, we're going to move it up by minus 5 pixels. These are arbitrary values. Just play around with it. So that's how I found out that these would work. If I just kind of played around with the different values. So now if we open up that navbar hamburger button, we can see that it turns into an X just like that. Cool. So that is one part of our navbar done. Let's move on to the actual content part of the navbar. So below the button, and I'm going to go ahead and minimize this button here. Below the button, let's create a conditionally rendered component. So if mobile nav is true, which means if the mobile nav is open, then let's render a motion.div. And inside of this div, well, first, let's actually give it a few classes. So let's give it a class name of fixed, inset0, bgblue600, and p6. And let's just save that and see what that looks like. So we've added a background essentially for our mobile navbar, and it looks something like this. Obviously, there's nothing here yet, so let's go ahead and add some content to that mobile navbar. So within this motion div, let's go ahead and add a UL, and inside of this UL, we'll do a few LIs, and then let's put an A in here. Let's change that just to generic link number 1. And I'll give us a few class names as well. Let's do text 5XL. Let's do font semi-bold and text white. And I'm going to really quickly go up to my UL here and add a list none class just so we don't see any bullet points. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and copy this a few more times. So 1, 2, 3, link 2, and link 3. And let's go ahead and just space these links out a little bit. So on our UL, we'll do a space Y of 6. And in our wrapper motion div, let's go ahead and give this a flex a flex call, and then a justify center, just so everything moves to the center of our mobile navbar. Cool. So that's a basic navbar. I'm going to go ahead and add just a few little more bits of content just to make it look like that navbar I showed you earlier on site B. So to do that, I'm going to add a small divider here. Let's give that a W full, a height of 1 pixel, and a background white of 30. And then below that, I'm just going to mock up a few social media icons or a few buttons. So div class name BG white, rounded LG W8H8. Save that. Let me go ahead and put a list none up here. Cool. And then I'll copy this another 3 times. 2, 3. Let's do flex, justify center, gap X of 4, just like that. And then let us go up. Let's go back to the wrapper motion div up here, and then let's give it a space Y of let's go with 10 and see what that looks like. Cool. So here's a very basic mobile navbar, right? We have the content down, but it's not animated yet, and we can't really interact with it. So I'm gonna go ahead and refresh the page here, just so we get a reset. Cool. So now if we open our navbar, you'll see that the div will pop into place, but it isn't really animated, and there's also not a way that we can close it. So let's fix that second problem really quickly and just show the button on top of the mobile navbar. So to do that, it's actually really easy. All we do is go to our motion button component, give it a relative and a Z10. And what this will do is increase the Z context of our button and show it on top of the mobile navbar, just like that. So now we have access to interact with this button to open and close our mobile navbar. Now let's get to the real meat and potatoes of this and actually animate the div into place. So to do this, because it's a motion div, we can just use the animate prop like you would expect. So let's do an animate, and then let's do a X of, let's do a variant, my bad. I jumped the gun there again. Let's do a few variants here. We'll do a hide. And when the navbar is closed, when it is hidden, we want this to be out of view. So we're going to move this to -100%. That's going to take the navbar and move it to the left by 100%, essentially out of view of the page. We'll have a show, and we'll make this X of 0%. And this is the opposite of hide. It'll just put the blue box into view. And when we, so when the component mounts, we want it to play its enter animation. So we're going to animate the show state. We're going to set the initial state to its hidden state. And so when this component mounts, it's going to start at X minus 100%, and it'll animate into the 0% state. So let's go ahead and see that actually happen. So let me refresh the page real quick. And then if we run that animation, we can see that the navbar moved into place. Now we actually have an issue here. If we close this navbar, it actually just pops out of existence, and that's not what we want to have happen. The reason that happens is because we are conditionally rendering this component, and there is not a way in React, at least natively, to animate a component on its unmount process. Thankfully, though, Framer Motion does have a utility component that lets us do exactly that. It's called Animate Presence. So we're going to go ahead and import Animate Presence from Framer Motion. So to use an Animate Presence, all we have to do is just wrap this conditionally rendered component in an Animate Presence component. So just like this. We'll go all the way to the bottom of that conditionally rendered component and then close off our Animate Presence. Now, one quick thing with Animate Presence, we do need to include a key on the on the topmost motion component. So we're going to call this just mobile nav, just like that. And the key is there in order for Animate Presence to just track the mount and unmount cycles of this conditionally rendered component. Cool. I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page again. And now if we open our navbar, it'll pop into place. If we close it, it'll still pop out of existence. So we're missing just one more key thing here. And what that is an exit prop. So whenever you use an Animate Presence, you now have access to this exit prop on your topmost motion div or motion component. And just like animate and just like initial, exit can also accept a variant state to play. So in this case, we just want to play the hide state. Cool. Let me refresh the page again. And now if we open up our mobile navbar, it'll pop into place. If we close it, it will go and pop out of place. So cool. We're almost at the end line here. The next thing that we want to figure out is just how to animate the children elements of this navbar. And you might think that we just need to do a custom animate and a custom transition on each of these child elements of the navbar. And you'd be kind of right and also kind of wrong. Framer-motion has a great way of composing children animations, and it all happens through the transition prop. So let me give you a quick, let me just walk you through how to do that. So first things first, we do need to convert all of our children elements that we want to animate into framer-motion motion components. So that would include our UL for our links. So let's go ahead and change that to a motion.ul. That would also include our little white line here. So let's change that to a motion.div. And let's change that last UL to a motion.ul. Cool. So now all of our children elements are motion components. And as a result, we can then compose them together and do some really cool stagger animations with them by modifying the parent motion component that wraps all of the children motion components. So let's go ahead and do that. Go ahead and close this navbar out. So the first things first, we want to add a custom transition for when the navbar is hidden and when the navbar is being shown. Now, previously I showed you a transition prop that you put onto the motion component just like this, but you can actually define variant-based transitions by moving this prop and making it a key within the variant itself, just like this. So what this is essentially doing is this transition, whatever we apply to it, let's say delay of 1 or maybe 2 or something like that, this delay only gets applied to the hidden variant whenever it's playing. So if we close that out, it'll take 2 seconds for it to go back to place. And so we're going to use this to build a quick timeline for our children components. Before that, though, let's actually define some animations for our children. So remember from before, we can inherit our parents' variant states. So in the motion.ul, we want to have a hide variant, or we want to have a show variant. In our hide variant, let's give it a Y of 25% and an opacity of 0. When the element gets shown, let's move it to the top by giving it a 0% for Y and an opacity of 1, just like that. Now, if I play this animation again, we can kind of see that the links moved up to the top. It was kind of hard to see because it's actually playing at the exact same time that our navbar is animating in. So we're almost there, but not quite yet. Let's go ahead and add this exact same animation to the other 2 children elements. So this motion div will also give it the same variance, and this motion.ul, we will also give it the same variance as well. Cool. Now that we have those variants in place, I can go ahead and really quickly play that as well. We can see that all of those elements sort of pop into place, but it's a little bit hard to see. So to make this all staggered out and all play nicely, we can actually just modify the parent variance transition. So let me go ahead and add a transition here to the hide variant. And in this transition, what we want to have happen is we want to have all of the children animations play before the navbar closes itself. We want to see all the children elements kind of fade away, and then the navbar will go back to the left and just hide itself from the page. So to do that, we're going to use a when key here, and we're going to set this to after children. So in framer-motion, within the transition prop, there's something called when, and when essentially tells this motion component when it should play its animation. So when after children literally means play this variant state after all of the children's animations have completed. So now if I were to play the animation again, we could see that the children components will animate out of the page, or just they'll play their hidden animation, and then the navbar will hide itself because the children animations have already completed. Cool. We can also stagger our children too. So let's give this a stagger of 0.25. This will mean stagger the children animations 0.25 seconds apart. So now if I play this again, we can see that the links will animate out first, and then the white bar, and then the mocked up social buttons will animate out last. Cool. So that's only in the hidden direction. Let's go ahead and add this to the show direction. So we'll give this a transition, and we'll keep the same exact thing, except we want to change after children to before children. So what this will do is it'll open up that blue background first, and then it'll play the children animations and stagger them out by 0.25 seconds. So now if I open the nav bar again, we could see that the links show up first, then the white bar, then the social media buttons. And then if we close this out, everything will animate out one by one, and then the nav bar is closed. I'm going to take a quick sip of my iced tea real quick. Cool. So we are about there. One very quick thing that I want to mention though is that by default, framer-motion really likes to give everything a spring sort of animation. And you may have noticed this when I was opening and closing the nav bar, but the nav bar kind of opens and then it like bounces out of view and it comes back into view. And it's very jarring and very weird. So let's go ahead and actually change that transition itself. So to do that, we can use something called a motion config component. And what the motion config component does is it wraps all of your motion components and it basically just standardizes all of their transitions at once. So let's go ahead and go to animate, or let's go to this motion div right here, and we'll wrap it in a motion config component. So motion config. We'll then take that, we'll move it all the way to the bottom, right there. And so again, every motion component that's inside of a motion config will inherit that motion config's transition property. So transition, let's give it a type of spring, and let's give it a bounce, let's say 0.1. Now, there are many different transition properties that you can play around with in framer-motion. And honestly, that could be a talk in of itself just because there's so many different ways to do animations and transition effects. What I'm using here is called a spring animation or a spring transition effect. And what that does is it uses some sort of like physics, like kind of like a spring sort of emulation transition effect to give elements a more, natural feel when they move around. And then bounce here is just literally how bouncy should the element be as it's moving through its animation variant states. So if we play the animation again, you could see that this transition applied to the children elements. So like the links, the white bar and all that stuff. If we close it out, it's like really nice and smooth, but the actual background is still the same jittery sort of like, happy-go-lucky animation that's still playing. The reason why that's happening is because we actually defined a custom transition for each of those variant states on that parent motion component. And unfortunately, if we have a motion config that has a transition and a child motion component that defines its own transition, the child motion component's transition is going to beat out the motion config's one. So to fix this, all we're going to do is just copy the transition from the motion config into each of these children, or into each of these variant state transitions. There may be a better way that you can do to like share these transitions. Like maybe we could put this into one object and then just destructure that object across all three of these. But for now, just for the sake of this presentation, we're just going to do a little bit of repeated code. And so now let me refresh this, and we should now have a fully animated mobile navbar, just like that. Cool. So that was essentially my talk. We went through framer-motion. We talked about how to move a box with framer-motion, and I showed you how to build a full navbar using framer-motion and TailwindCSS. Yeah, so my links are here if you guys want to follow me. My Twitter is at Shaun Chander. My YouTube is also at Shaun Chander. Hopefully I post in the future there. And I'm also looking for an engineering role. So if anyone's opening or hiring, feel free to contact me through my website. that's all that I had for you guys today. I'm happy to take any questions on Framer or animations or anything like that. Go ahead and pop Zoom up open again.